So in my first hands-on review of the Xiaomi 12 Lite, I've mentioned about how the phone had lots of flagship level specs that make it an imitator of sorts, hiding under the shadow of being a mid-range phone. And based on my YouTube community post, all of y'all voted to go against this phone, the Poco F4. So here's that video for you. Now before anything, let's talk about the price of each phone. As of the recording of this video, the Poco F4 is priced at 1,599 ringgit, which is about 351 USD. Then the Xiaomi 12 Lite is priced at 100 ringgit or 22 USD more at 1,699 ringgit, which is about 373 USD. And I have to be honest to say that initially I was wondering why the Xiaomi 12 Lite was higher in terms of the price range. Then I remembered that the chipset on the Xiaomi 12 Lite was better, and that brings us to the next topic, which is the hardware. So the Poco F4 is equipped with the Snapdragon 870 chipset, which is the same chipset as the Poco F3. And that was pretty questionable, as why didn't Poco upgrade it from that 7nm chipset? And the Xiaomi 12 Lite is using the Snapdragon 778G chipset, which is a better 6nm process chip. Now, I wouldn't say that both phones ran cool during long, heavy gameplay or use, but there were no overheating issues when using this particular chipset, which I'll dive in deeper in my gaming review later on in this video. Now, in terms of the weight, the light word on the Xiaomi 12 Lite is not only in the name to represent the specs compared to its elder siblings, but the phone was physically light too, at a mere 173 grams compared to 195 grams on the Poco F4. Now, as for which felt nicer in the hands, well, because I'm not a huge fan of a glossy finish since it does attract lots of fingerprints. Hence, I preferred the matte finish on the Xiaomi 12 Lite. And to me, it just felt premium to hold, especially with the more squared off edges. Now, if you're like me who like to tap the phone when it's on a desk, the Poco F4 will not wobble at all when you're typing on the virtual keyboard, where else it does wobble on the Xiaomi 12 Lite. Then the placements of the ports and buttons are the same, with only the speaker looking just a little different. So overall, I would give this round to the Xiaomi 12 Lite from the build quality and the overall design perspective. Now, looking at the phone's display, the Poco F4 has a slightly bigger 6.67 inches compared to the Xiaomi 12 Lite's 6.55 inches. Now, I have said it before and I'll repeat it again that the Poco F4 screen is really impressive with perfect adjustments of the automatic screen brightness mode, and the phone can get really bright up to 1300 nits of peak brightness, which is very unheard of for a smartphone within this price range. And while the Xiaomi 12 Lite has a lower peak brightness at 950 nits, but I felt that the phone was still quite visible during harsh daylight. Now, both phones have the exact resolution of 1080 by 2400 pixels, so it's equally as sharp, and it also has the same Corning Gorilla Glass 5 protection as well. Now, unlocking the phone is different, where it is through the in-display fingerprint sensor for the Xiaomi 12 Lite, and like how all the Poco series usually is, it unlocks via the side-mounted fingerprint sensor. Now, both are equally as fast, so this does boil down to a personal preference. Now, as for video content consumption, they were equally as good once again, with Dolby Vision certified playback on Netflix, and once again the automatic brightness on the Poco F4 when it comes to watching videos were better and more versatile in different lighting situations. Then the Poco F4 also has the additional option of the AI engine for AI HDR enhancement and MEMC as well, which is an added plus to enhance the HDR playback and a smoother motion too. So if I really had to choose, my pick would be the Poco F4, but that goes without saying that the Xiaomi 12 Lite is not good because it was still excellent too. So the cameras on these two phones once again could be the decision maker or the deciding factor between these two phones. So the question is that if the huge sensor on the Xiaomi 12 Lite on the cameras is better than the Poco F4. Now, a recap of the specs, the Xiaomi 12 Lite has a massive 108 megapixel f1.9 main lens, an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide lens, and a 2 megapixel f2.4 macro lens. Yep, everyone's favorite lens. Then the Poco F4 has a 64 megapixel f1.8 main lens and a similar ultra-wide and macro lens, so the only difference from a hardware's perspective is in the main lens. Then as for the front camera, the Xiaomi 12 Lite has a bigger 32 megapixel f2.5 and the Poco F4 has a smaller 20 megapixel, also with the same aperture value as well. Now before I go into the picture samples, a very quick disclaimer that these particular shots were taken in a very gloomy weather as of late here in Malaysia. Now I really wanted some nice bright sunshine daily, but I just couldn't get any, so I went ahead and just took some shots on these two phones instead of delaying this particular video further. Now starting from the high megapixel mode, the images looked a bit washed out. The contrast balance on the Poco F4 was nowhere as great as the Xiaomi 12 Lite. And of course in this particular mode, you can zoom in close about 6 times into the images where you'll see sharpness and better details on the Xiaomi 12 Lite since it had a way bigger megapixel count as well. Now switching over to the ultra-wide lenses, this time around the Poco F4 looked nicer as the images were brighter and the color accuracy were more on point than the Xiaomi 12 Lite without crushing the shadows, which was quite peculiar since both had the same ultra-wide lenses. Then the same could be said for the main lenses where the pictures on the Xiaomi 12 Lite seems to be a bit more bluish on the skies at the building of this first image towards the left. However, in the second image, the palm tree on the right looked washed out once again on the Poco F4 compared to a better contrast balance on the Xiaomi 12 Lite. So it seems like the image processing on the Poco F4 is not very consistent on the main lenses. Then the 2x zoom images look very identical on both phones, where the pictures on the Xiaomi 12 Lite once again had a slightly bluish tint, but it was slightly sharper than the Poco F4. Then the second image had the Poco F4 being washed out once again. Now as for the rear portrait mode for the lenses on objects, the Xiaomi 12 Lite seems to be confused on keeping which subject in focus, whether or not the cone in the middle and also the motorbike's rim as well, where the Poco F4 kept the background blur more consistent. Then on plants, both seems to be very great on both phones. Then as for portrait images though, both did a horrible job trying to get strands of hair to be able to focus properly, but the skin tones on the Xiaomi 12 Lite were better and more accurate as well. Then in this second photo, the age detection is slightly better on the Xiaomi 12 Lite. Next, switching over to the macro mode though. Oh god, the images coming out from the Xiaomi 12 Lite were just crappy, man. There was so much noise in the background and the bud of the flower looked almost fake in these two sample shots, as you guys can clearly see. But I wouldn't say that I'm a huge fan of the macro shots coming out on the Poco F4 too. Now I don't mind this whole macro lens if it performs well, but I don't get the purpose of these lenses if it's gonna perform like this. Now as for the night mode shots for the ultra-wide lens, the highlight and the shadows were quite identical, except there seemed to be a bit more detail in the sky area on the Xiaomi 12 Lite in this first image, even though both phones have the same lenses as mentioned earlier. However, in this second image, I like how the skies were a bit cleaned up towards the top left of the image on the Poco F4, hence you'll get a cleaner image. Now what's interesting is that the main lenses look very close to each other on both phones, even in a slightly low lighting environment. And if you like to take selfies at night, while both expose the images very well. But they were quite soft and the age detection on the Xiaomi 12 Lite was once again better. Now the regular mode on the selfie images were great, just a slight difference in contrast, but overall it did perform great if the light is in front of you. But if the light is behind you, don't even bother trying to get a clean shot for the background area for the Poco F4, as the Xiaomi 12 Lite just did a better job over here. And if you go into the portrait mode, the age detection on the Xiaomi 12 Lite is better and the skin tones once again is also better on this particular phone. So when it comes to the recording resolution of the ultra-wide lenses on both phones, they can only record up to 1080p. What's new? And they look decent, but once again, the Poco F4 was looking a little brighter compared to a deeper contrast look on the Xiaomi 12 Lite. Now, image stabilization was a funny story because both phones were great when using the ultra-wide lenses without that so-called steady mode, because when I put on the steady mode on both phones, it looked wobbly like this, which just simply does not make any sense. So please don't use that steady mode, guys. And once again, on the main lenses, the footage seems to be pushing the contrast and highlights just too much on the Poco F4. making it a little washed out once again. Then as for the video recording resolution, here's another way or another thing that Xiaomi and Poco just doesn't want to improve and move forward in year 2022. Because guys, even until now, both phones record only up to 1080p. Woohoo! 1080p baby! Where the only difference is that the Xiaomi 12 Lite can record up to 60 frames per second instead of just 30 frames per second on the Poco F4. But the overall footage was decent with excellent image stabilization. But remember, with apps like Instagram and TikTok, it will bring down the resolution further, so having a 4K front camera would definitely give us more benefits. Then taking videos at night was decent on both phones and the image stabilization was very great over here. However, the quality of the ultra-wide lenses was not as great as the main lens and the video footage looked a little noisy, especially in the shadows area. And when it comes to the selfie video, while the image stabilization was good, but the overall video quality was decent at best. Next, let's see how both phones' cameras perform when it comes to the audio and video recording for a more vlogging situation, so you can be the judge. Okay, so this is a vlogging test for you to hear how the camera recording from an audio's perspective is. Test 1, 2, test 1, 2, test 1, 2. Now, when I look at the viewfinder on the Xiaomi 12 Lite, it looks better in terms of the overall image quality. The contrast and the shadows is better compared to the Poco F4. And of course, we also want to know what are your thoughts, or I would like to know what your thoughts are compared to both of the audio recording and of course the overall video recording for the front cameras on both of these phones. So guys, with this, there are very interesting mixed results, but if you really had to choose, which camera smartphone would you choose? The Poco F4 or the Xiaomi 12 Lite? Do let me know in the comment section below. Now speaking of which, if you guys are enjoying this video and find it helpful, don't forget to give this video a nice big thumbs up and subscribe to this channel, Adam Lobo TV, if you haven't done so. That would be very much appreciated. Now as for the phone's battery specs, the Poco F4 has a larger battery of 4500 milliamps, which I would consider just okay, as 5000 milliamps would have been better. But when I learned that the Xiaomi 12 Lite had only 4300 milliamps, that for me was pretty ridiculous for a smartphone these days, right? And the problem with the latest MIUI update is that the screen on time does not read after the phone has charged at 100% battery like before. So what happens is that the screen on time shows pretty inconsistent results, where sometimes it shows the amount of usage that I used the whole day, and suddenly when I'm going back to viewing the screen, it goes back to 0, even without using any cleaner apps when I use it daily. So with this, you'll have to take my word for it that I got about 7 hours and 30 minutes of screen on time on the Poco F4 compared to the Xiaomi 12 Lite, where I was averaging about 6 hours plus and even sometimes 7 hours maximum if I don't really use the phone heavily. Now keep in mind that these tests were done in the forced 120Hz refresh rate and dark mode turned on as well. Now charging performance was equally as good, where it supports fast charging up to 67 watts with no wireless charging. So obviously the winner over here would be the Poco F4 with the bigger battery and of course better screen on time when using it daily. So since nothing much has changed on the MIUI skins in my last Poco and also Xiaomi review, I'm just going to let you know very quickly that during my daily usage, it was fine. I had no complaints except for the fact that I feel that MIUI should really consider changing an entire UI to probably follow the footsteps of OnePlus, of going with the overhaul of their layout in Oxygen OS 13. But just for the sake of letting you all know that as of the recording of this video, the Poco F4 was at version 13.0.5 and the Xiaomi 12 Lite were at version 13.0.7. Now, even though both versions on the MIUI were slightly different, I did not feel any difference when using both phones daily, especially since both phones had the same RAM and storage configuration, and the haptic feedback on both phones were pretty great as well. So if the RAM and the storage configuration is the same, how about when it comes to gaming then? Well, based on my test, starting with Genshin Impact on the Poco F4, the best settings were at medium graphics, where the game ran smoothly with no visible stutter or micro lag as how it was during my previous review, and the phone barely became hot even though of 30 minutes of continuous gameplay. Now switching over to PUBG Mobile, as usual the gameplay was very optimized on the Poco F4 and I felt like the touch control seems to be more fluid and more responsive as well. Then as for the Xiaomi 12 Lite, the settings were the same as the Poco F4 and had the same great results as the Poco F4 on Genshin Impact. However, compared to the Poco F4 when playing PUBG Mobile, it was still great, but I felt like the touch responsiveness on the Poco F4 was better than the Xiaomi 12 Lite. So I would give a slight edge to the Poco F4 when it comes to gaming. So in conclusion, which phone should you pick? Well, I humbly believe that the camera's performance played a huge role over here to be a so-called better phone, and based on my tests, although the camera samples could be inconsistent, but I preferred the Xiaomi 12 Lite more when it comes to the skin tones and the image processing factor as well. Now yes, the battery life on the Xiaomi 12 Lite was a little disappointing for me, but I just love how the phone felt in my hands, and with the fast charging, I could live with this kind of battery life. So yes, with that, in my humble opinion, given a choice, my pick would be the Xiaomi 12 Lite based on everything that I've mentioned here, and I humbly feel that this extra 100 ringgit or 22 USD would benefit me or even you with the updated chipset and the overall software updates. As I felt that the Poco F4 until today did not have the same oomph as the Poco F3 had. But who cares what I think? What's more important is what you think. So let me know in the comment section below which one would you choose, and let's discuss it over there.